Zdravo. Hello. Good afternoon, dear Point friends, panelists, and everyone who is watching us live. Welcome to the new online format of the Point conference, at least until we can organize the real one in person. Unfortunately, as many other events and in the interest of everyone's safety, this year we will hang out and talk this way. However, we are planning a series of events, talks, topics, videos, and loads of other materials that would keep us all busy and engaged by the time we can meet again. And that time will come soon, I hope so. Also, I want to mention in regards to this theme that we will, through the topics of the month, talk about many themes like going online in Balkans, culture and technology, security and privacy, migrant crisis in the pandemic, and many other things. More about today's topic. First point talk, Balkan elections, and so many things you will hear from Darko Brkan. So Darko, please say hi to all of us.
Hi everybody. I hope you can hear me and see me. I'm Darko Brkan from CAY Not, and it's a pleasure to welcome everybody to another edition of Point. I've been usually doing this from stage for the past 8 years or 9 years, actually, since in 2020 we didn't have the conference, but this time unfortunately it's happening behind the screen. But I'm sure that we will get out of this as soon as possible, and that we will be able to get you all to Sarajevo, Bosnia, as we have always done before. But in the meantime, we'll be kicking off these talks that we planned, and we'll be over the next couple of months definitely doing a lot of different events, different formats, interviews, online videos, reports, and stuff like that. So keep tuned for everything to come. And today, actually, we'll be talking about the elections in the region. Bosnia and Herzegovina has had elections in November, but we will not be speaking today about the Bosnian elections. We'll have a separate panel only on that. Today, we will be talking about the elections in the Southeast Europe region that have happened during the pandemic. We know that there's more upcoming elections in the region, and we will have a lot of things that will happen on the Point Talk platform that will cover all that. So, but for now, we want to kind of talk about the experiences of the elections that have happened in the region, especially with this kind of emphasis on the pandemic and how much the pandemic has affected all aspects of elections, everything from implementations to election results to pre-election campaign, how much the disinformation and this whole online life has affected the elections and similar. Also, we will definitely touch upon all the specific political and societal issues within specific countries. But first of all, we want to overall digest this issue of the elections within the pandemic. Having that in mind, I'm gonna quickly present you the people who will be talking to us, to Selma and me today. So for starters, we have Dr. Beata Martin Razumilović. I hope I'm pronouncing it well, from our partner, International Foundation for Electoral Systems. So IFES is going to be our partner on this. Is actually our partner on this panel, and actually will help us from a more expert point of view, digest more into the elections. Then we have Sandra Benčić from Možemo platform in Croatia, and she is also an MP in the Croatian parliament. Then we have Damian Mančevski from North Macedonia, as he calls himself, ex-politician. Then let's continue with North Macedonia. We have Filip Stojanovski from the Metamorphosis Foundation joining us, and they have been extensively working on disinformation during the pandemic, and especially impact of disinformation on the elections with the emphasis on the pandemic. Then we have two more of our partners, Milica Kovačević from Center for Democratic Transition, and also working for Otprinkavanje.me, disinformation debunking portal, and Pavle Dimitrijević from CRTA, from Belgrade, from Serbia, who will talk about the elections and the impact of the pandemic on the elections. So to start off, I will ask Dr. Martin Razmilović to start off with a keynote, giving us some specific insights that IFES has on the elections in the region. Beata, please take the floor.
Great, thank you very much, and I hope that you can hear me and I hope that everyone can see me. So, dobar dan, dame I gospodo, and meredita zonje zatarinje. I'd firstly like to really thank Zaštone for organizing such an interesting and thoughtful dialogue. And it's a real pleasure to join you today and to discuss with you IFES's role in elections during the pandemic, especially across the Balkan countries. Within a very short time period at the start of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe and really presented a series of unique challenges to many aspects of public life, including that of democracy and good governance. These circumstances brought a number of issues to bear upon the holding of genuine elections in a way that sought to balance public health concerns with the democratic needs of countries. Election administrators had to develop safety measures and assess election day processes to make sure that voters, poll workers, and observers were protected and that the risk of exposure was limited. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, Serbia, Croatia, North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Bosnia-Herzegovina have all held elections, with Kosovo to follow next week and Albania in April. Each election has provided a number of lessons learned in the conduct of elections during a pandemic, from the adoption of risk-based analyses and development of mitigation guidelines to more proactive voter information, and sometimes providing alternative methods to cast ballots. So in particular countries, and I'll start with Serbia, many will know that the pandemic there began during the election campaign and prompted the halt of this campaign and the postponement of the elections. When the elections were rescheduled for June the 21st, there was only a window of roughly 1 month for the Republic Electoral Commission and for that government's crisis task force to determine safety measures for election day. With IFES assistance, RIK conducted a risk assessment to determine key recommendations, many of which were included in the crisis task force official election day instructions. Time constraints, however, remained a challenge to ensure that instructions reached citizens and that the information which was shared was accurate. And IFES worked with RIK to develop a quick and effective information campaign, including television and radio public service announcements, newspaper brochures, social media posts, and polling station posters in an effort to allow citizens to be better informed about the steps that they should take in order to be better protected during their expression of their fundamental right. In Croatia, in early 2020, IFES supported the State Election Commission in an electoral leadership workshop to hone their crisis leadership and communication skills, which are really key during a pandemic like COVID-19. Later on, in Croatia's parliamentary elections that were held earlier than planned on July 5th in anticipation of a COVID resurgence in the autumn, the State Election Commission worked closely with the Croatian Institute for Public Health to develop and issue recommendations for citizens to protect their health throughout the election process. As many of you will know, however, the SEC did face legal complaints regarding the possible disenfranchisement of voters diagnosed with COVID-19, and this became a feature to some extent of that election. 10 days later, in North Macedonia, early parliamentary elections were held on July the 15th, following their postponement from April. As Parliament was dissolved before the pandemic struck, there was a legal gap regarding the discontinued election process and the setting of a new election date that was difficult to overcome within constitutional norms and legal norms that were somewhat silent on the issue and would pertain to the reconvening of Parliament, and especially regarding what norms were extant in establishing a new election date. Through dialogue between parties, the Ministry of Health, the State Election Commission, and government, supplemented by public opinion surveys, the SEC developed protocols and safety measures, and IFES also worked to support voter education through a number of channels, including public service announcement videos, social media posts, radio messages, and newsletters, especially for marginalized groups. Then later in the summer in Montenegro, there were also parliamentary elections, the date of which was moved from October to August 30th in anticipation of a COVID-19 resurgence. There, the State Election Commission issued mandates for polling stations to implement mitigation measures on election day in accordance with the standards that had been developing across the region. IFES supported the SEC in Montenegro, including with crisis leadership and communication assistance in the months prior, similarly to what was provided to the SEC in Croatia. And IFES also worked with civil society partners to track coordinated inauthentic behavior on social media during the election period. And then most recently in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there were two significant elections. First of all, nationwide local elections that took place on November the 15th, following their postponement from October. And then Mostar's first local elections in more than a decade were held on December 20th. The Central Election Commission issued revised instructions for polling stations and election officials to protect citizens on election day. And these instructions were based on similar measures implemented elsewhere, complemented by IFES's own recommendations, drawing on lessons learned from across the region, as well as from public opinion survey data that was collected by IFES. Lastly, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, IFES assisted the Central Election Commission in the development of an innovative online training platform, which allowed poll workers to gain a deeper understanding of their roles and responsibilities while trying to minimize risk from in-person exposure. So a few lessons learned that can be drawn as key from these experiences in the region include four main points that I would like to mention today. The first is ensuring that public dialogue and messaging around changes to the legal framework or election date be inclusive, cohesive, and expansive, including all stakeholders in the election process, be that political parties, civil society organizations, and voters themselves. The second would be that coordinating across key institutions is absolutely essential to developing more robust responses, and doing so in a manner in which sufficient time is allocated for their implementation. So really there is no time to waste, and as soon as a country is aware that elections are on the schedule, they should really be thinking about how they can coordinate these kinds of COVID responses early in the process. The third would be developing targeted voter information and outreach campaigns to convey essential elements of that response, especially on how it impacts voters on election day, so that they know where to come, what to do, what to bring, and what measures they'll need to take. And the fourth is encouraging comprehensive and early COVID-19 sensitive training for election officials and for election administrators who may themselves be quite scared about the possibility of exposure and what measures are being taken to protect them. And finally, I would like to say a few words about disinformation in this context. A considerable challenge to election integrity across the region remains this issue of disinformation. And this has been further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic in what the World Health Organization has now termed an infodemic. With an already crowded information environment, voters are faced with influence operations or with misinformation about election day processes related to COVID-19, the risk of exposure to the disease, and how parties and candidates and governments are responding to COVID-19. In Serbia, for instance, data shows that 49% of respondents were concerned that some of the information they received may not have been accurate, and 65% believed that foreign interference plays a role in the elections. Similarly, more than 80% of respondents in Bosnia and Herzegovina believe disinformation and misinformation influences the way voters trust the credibility of the country's elections. In Montenegro, IFES supported a civil society organization which identified a network of 51 entities on Facebook suspected of engaging in coordinated inauthentic behavior related to those elections, with a total of 16 million interactions across all posts. The suspected network was shared with Facebook, and their threat intelligence team confirmed the value of the information that was shared with them. All of this represents a clear threat to voters' trust in elections in the region, as well as the proliferation of inaccurate information. It is key for stakeholders in the Balkans to develop strategies to counter false narratives and to mitigate their impact on electoral integrity. And we at IFES very much welcome this discussion, which will serve as a gateway to drawing additional lessons learned on how COVID-19 impacts elections, especially as it relates to access to timely, accurate voter information, and what Kosovo, Albania, and many other countries around the globe can consider when seeking to ensure public health while administering elections during the pandemic. So once again, I would like to thank Zashtome for the very good cooperation for organizing this event, and I look forward to a robust discussion on this important question. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Beata. And now we will hear more about North Macedonia and the elections there. So Damian, please tell us something about how did the pandemic affected the election in North Macedonia and election campaign?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for the invitation. Yes, I would like to also join Mr. Balkan's comments. It would be much better if we met physically and discuss about this, but these are the conditions influencing everything, also elections. As he said, I'm a former politician because I left politics only a few months ago, but before that I used to be until August, Minister of Information, Society Administration, and heavily involved in the organization of the elections here in North Macedonia. Plus, I was vice president of the ruling party and deputy chief of the HQ. So again, involved from the side of the campaign, and many years before that. Basically, what I have to say about the influence of the pandemic was that it did influence the way the elections were organized, especially the campaign was organized. But it did not much influence the turnout, for instance. Yes, the turnout was lower, but not significantly and good enough to give legitimacy of the elections. It was above 50%. We are used on a turnout around 60, let's say, in North Macedonia. This time was just above 50, but still significant turnout. So the biggest challenge was to, prior of the elections, to convince the citizens that there will be health standards implemented, they would feel safe enough to go out and vote and freely express their will. Now, how was that organized? There was significant campaign organized by the State Electoral Commission, which they had significant support for IFES, and I would like to thank IFES for all the support they're providing to the State Electoral Commission in North Macedonia throughout the years, but especially for the last elections. And it was very crucial to convince the citizens from an independent source of information that it's safe to go out and vote. But the biggest influence was to the campaign, to how the campaign was being conducted by the participants in the elections. And this is where I step in now as a participant in the election. Then I was also an elected MP these elections. So first of all, we were running the campaign in a way that we needed to limit physical contact as much as possible. So no big rallies that we're used on having here in Balkans were organized. We only organized small town hall meetings with no more than 50 up to 100 maybe participants, with health protocols, with distance, with masks and everything surrounding it. And we turned to, there was no door-to-door canvassing. And we turned much more, significantly more, to the digital platforms, to social media, to traditional media, to broadcast, to TV. It still plays the most significant role in elections in Balkans, I would say, unfortunately still, but this is the case. And we tried to, even with our behavior, to show the citizens that it is possible to have elections. It is possible to conduct them safely, as every other aspect of life needed to go on somehow with respect of health protocols. We had to make sure the citizens were feeling safe to go out and vote. And I think we succeeded in this. We have successfully organized elections and now fully functional and legitimate institutions, which, as previously mentioned, was a problem with us because the COVID pandemic caught us right in the middle of the electoral process. So the parliament was dissolved and we needed to delay the elections due to the health crisis. So there was this urgency to use the opportunity to organize elections as soon as possible, because the government that I was part of was actually functioning in a very, I would say, gray constitutional area, that we had to take over a lot of the competencies of the parliament while not really having a parliament to control the government. So, but it's good that it's behind us. And so this was, I think, the biggest influence, not that much to the electoral process itself. The elections, the voting was not much differently organized. So we had the same number. We increased very insignificantly the number of voting stations, but we implemented the health protocols. So mask on, disinfection of hands, distancing of 2 meters. The electoral boards were educated well enough so that they could restore the order and keep the order while people were voting. So everything went fine, and I think this was a good experience, not only from North Macedonia, but other countries also organized elections that even in these conditions, if well organized, then elections could be held.
Thank you, Damian. We had also local elections in November, but we will talk about more Bosnian elections in next point talk. I would like to ask you, is there any wind of change in North Macedonia?
Well, no, we won again. I mean, the previous government and the party that I was part of. So the same, whenever people ask me why did I leave, they think that I lost the elections, but no, I actually left politics while winning. Yes, a lot of change is happening daily, and it has to. Why? Because not only because of the health crisis, but in some areas, the health crisis, the pandemic has moved many of the social and political processes faster rather than they would move previously. So, for instance, and this was part of my portfolio for me, maybe that I'm preaching that story. Because of these health issues in the pandemic, the digitalization of the society has increased, has accelerated, not only in the public sector, but also in the private. Look at this meeting, how we're holding it. And many more things now became much more available rather than before. For instance, currently I'm in the private sector, but if for some of the meetings I'm having 3 times a day, today I can have it in 1 day. Previously, I would need like maybe 3 months to have all the people around the world gathered. It was not the habit. So many things were moved because of this. And also this reflects politics, it reflects everyday life, it reflects business. So even if when we go back to some kind of normal, let's hope that it will be as soon as possible, many things we will see that have changed in this period in between, that we will not conduct business as usual, that it will be some kind of hybrid model. I'm always in favor of human contact and direct contact, but still we will see that we have changed the way that we think, we behave, we conduct, and many of these processes will be different.
Thank you, Damian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Damian. North Macedonia is probably one of the definitely most important and most interesting places when it comes to elections, and you've definitely had a few over the past couple of years. But it's hard to topple North Macedonia regionally. But I guess we have to move to Montenegro after this, because I think that's actually the place where it gets also very interesting. Both in terms of how the pre-election campaign was conducted and in the way what the results were and the whole story. And it has been, to be honest, it's been hard finding who to get to speak on the panel in Montenegro, because you have to be very careful if you want only one person not to be on one side or the other or whatever. So we have Milica from Center for Democratic Transition with us. They've been observing the elections. They've been very active in different political movements on the elections. And actually, I think that Milica also, from the other hand, can very well comment on the political reality in Macedonia. I guess there weren't too many town halls and small meetings in Montenegro. during the pre-election campaign. I think it was a little bit bigger. So like, you know, let's talk about these differences, and then let's talk about if you can reflect on the political reality, on the obvious like change of government that happened and everything. So, you know, just an introductory words from you.
Thank you, Darko. Thank you for the announcement. I hope I'll be able to provide answers, but situation is not completely clear yet. So big change happened. We had a storm of change, but not everything is settled down. And for some things, we still don't know what to expect, or we don't have some final conclusions. So we did observe elections. It's one of our core program, and entirety of the process, from the procedure, campaign, media, political finance, and we had a different role through the team of Raskrinkavanje Me, which is dealing with disinformation. So obviously in last year, COVID and elections were two big topics that the majority of our analysis actually focused on that. So what happened, I will try just to continue what Beata and Damian were saying. So we had elections on August 30th. Which they were scheduled earlier than they had to be. So the last deadline was October. It was due to the expectations that autumn crisis, COVID crisis will be bigger, and also due to the fact that prior to calling the elections, some of you remember, Montenegro proudly declared itself corona-free destination. We had in May and June 40 days without a single COVID case, and new cases started to appear in second half of June. Elections were called on June 28th. So we were in better situation than North Macedonia or Croatia or Serbia, because we already had some experiences, and there were experiences around the world, like France and many other countries. IFES, for example, already started releasing brief papers explaining good practices, pointing to problems. We could learn from our neighbors with similar legal systems, with similar political traditions, but we didn't. So we waited as we normally do, our authorities. So we were equally unprepared, like we had to have it in March or April. Our problem was electoral legislation that requires 2/3 majority for any change. So we couldn't actually change the law. Parliament was still there, but it couldn't change the law because due to the complex political relations, it was impossible to achieve that kind of majority. On the other hand, Montenegro, unlike some other countries in the region, never introduced officially state of emergency. And I actually think it was good. We as civil society, as human rights activists, we didn't advocate for the introduction of the state of emergency, because it means the biggest possible limitation of human rights, and actually where no laws are anymore in place. But I have to say that introducing the state of emergency maybe will allow government to be more flexible with changing rules, like to organize voting in 2 or 3 days, like in some other countries, or to organize special polling stations. They couldn't do anything of that. So the elections had to be in 1 day and in polling stations that are defined by the law. So you can't organize special polling stations like in hospitals, in institutional quarantines. So just to remember that was a long time ago, but there was a time when the epidemic here was under control, and actually authorities were tracing contacts. So people were in quarantines or they were self-isolating in homes. So there were several hundred people in institutional quarantines. There were a couple of 3,000 or 4,000 of people who weren't proven as COVID positive, but were in contact and potentially ill and therefore in quarantines. What our authorities decided to do, they basically decided to stall and not to bring the rules until it's late. And we appealed many times and asked how these people will vote. Everyone has to have the right to vote. What they did, they waited until 20th of August or something, and that is when they brought, very late in the process, they brought the rules, and the rules were against the constitution because the rules were actually taking away suffrage from people who are either positive or are suspected to potentially be positive. And I have to say that civil society had strong reaction on that, and it was not popular reaction because of the fear, because of the pressure. Everyone thought that we are, you know, just doing that to undermine the public health, to criticize the authorities. We were arguing that we will have to live after elections, and that we will have to live in COVID for quite a long time, and that we can't allow that basic citizen rights are taken away just if you are positive, because all of us will eventually be in that situation. So us and one another NGOs, we went to the Constitutional Court, and court declared these decisions of State Election Commission unconstitutional, but it came like a couple of days before elections. So I'm not actually sure how many people were informed that they actually have the right to vote, that they have, if they demand to vote, no matter whether they are quarantined or in hospital, they can vote. Also, authorities released those who were self-isolating in homes. They were allowed to go to the polling station. So we managed to do something. We are not sure if everyone had used that right, everyone who wanted. And that's important from the point of view of human rights. But from the point of view of election observation and legitimacy of elections, the outcome was extremely high. So we had around 75%, which is 2 or 3% higher than previous parliamentary elections, and almost 10% higher than, for example, 2012 parliamentary elections. It is one of the highest turnouts in Montenegrin history. Higher was 2006 referendum. So it was strong legitimacy. Everyone actually, well, many people voted. How was the campaign? So officially public gatherings were prohibited or limited. At one period of time, it was to only, I think, 20 participants. What happened is that then political parties didn't organize rallies or gatherings or anything. And that enabled so additionally supported what is already known as misuse of public offices, when you have ministers and other state officials campaigning. So basically that was allowed. And if you watch the news on our public broadcaster, you could only see ministers opening this and that. And opposition was not visible on a public broadcaster. That is unfortunately and traditionally always aligning with the government and promoting the government. On the other hand, and I don't know how many people we have here that follow closely Montenegro, but we had very specific elections because the key topic of the one of the key topics, most important, was the law on freedom of religion. And actually Serbian Orthodox Church took important part and directly was involved in the elections. And they were organizing protest gatherings since December 2019. Then they stopped for some time during March and April when we had full lockdown, but then continuously there were breaches, violations of these rules, arrests, tensions, and everything. So we were watching big public gatherings organized by the church. Then obviously in a response, for example, for July 13, which is national holiday, there were big public gatherings of the other side. And that entire election atmosphere actually ruined any chance to enforce the anti-epidemic rules, because the rules were broken so many times that us, decent people that were, respecting the rules and trying in that way to support the struggle of the public health, we felt really stupid. You know, we felt that we are idiots that are being punished for, I don't know, going out to take trash out after the curfew, while these things, these massive events, it's just impossible to prosecute that or to punish that. So that entire situation, I'm speaking about the crisis, the COVID crisis, continued after the election. And now to the political points, we changed, the Montenegrins voted to change the government after 30 years of rule of the Democratic Party of Socialists with its partners. So they were at least one mandate short to form the government this time. That was, I mean, it shows serious rift, serious division in the society, but that was point of very important celebration for a very big number of our citizens. So celebrations happened in the election night and in the days of after elections, and that is basically the point where health crisis was out of control, because then you had post-election big public gatherings of those that lost elections. And then you have that event that probably everyone in the region and even around the globe saw, that mass on the funeral of highest Montenegro priest of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Montenegro. So we are now, I think, I haven't looked for in the last couple of days, but we are like second country in the world probably when you look at the number of infected per 100,000 of citizens. We also have increasing death rates, and we don't have a single dose of vaccine yet. Which for this new government makes another important challenge, because coming to power after 30 years of rule of such a strong, you know, we had one dominant party system for such a long time, is difficult enough that you don't take that in a COVID crisis that severely hit the economy. We will have one of the biggest drops of GDP. Also, I think globally, definitely in this region. Tourism is our most important pillar of our economy, generated only 10% of income last year in comparison to the previous year. And in addition to that, who came in power is very heterogeneous coalition consisting of three main blocks. Who are ideologically not just heterogeneous, they have completely opposing ideology. You have Democratic Front, which is ethno-nationalist, right-wing, pro-Russian, and then you have URA, which is green, liberal, pro-Western. You have government that looks like a technical government because it doesn't consist of politicians. It's kind of some experiment with experts that don't necessarily have a strong enough political support, and that are being criticized equally or even more by their own MPs in the parliament. So it continues to be an issue on COVID elections, and we, in our system, will have series of local elections this year. And Darko, you know, because you are our guest often here, you know that all elections in Montenegro are historic ones.
Yes, definitely. I think you actually changed the paradigm of elections in the pandemic, because you're always asking whether the pandemic influenced the elections, and I think Montenegro is the place where actually the elections influenced the pandemic mostly, because of the way they were conducted, and the results of the elections were actually that the pandemic kind of took over much bigger than it used to before the elections.
If you just let me add one thing, I mean, on the election day, there were, of course, shortcomings, but basically there were lines, there were health measures. So I just want to emphasize this for those countries, maybe someone is listening who didn't have elections in pandemics. You can organize proper elections and you don't necessarily end up in the burst of pandemics, but it's the things around the elections that affected this situation more than the very day of casting ballots.
Well, from historical elections, we are moving to spectacular elections. Pavle Dimitrijevic from Serbia, please tell us something about more Serbian elections.
Okay, thank you, Selma. It's good to be again a part of the Point Conference, even in this format. Well, I don't know what does it mean spectacular elections in terms of Serbia. I cannot say that there is something spectacular, but when we are talking about pandemic and elections, I can say that pandemic affected all aspects of election process, from legal to practical issues regarding the organization of the election day. So from the legal perspective, as you probably know, we had termination of campaign after 2 weeks of duration because of the state of the emergency, and campaign continued after the state of emergency after almost 2 months of abortion. And also it's important to say that new day for the E-Day was set up for June 21st. So campaign was completely different, and most of the political actors tried to explain their views and messages through the online channels. I must say that the ruling party, Srpska napredna stranka or SNS, for the first time in our modern political history, organized 2 online meetings. They used pink television, most prominent private.
That was spectacular, Pavle.
Yes.
That was spectacular.
Yes. Okay. So they used pink television, most prominent private television in Serbia. President of the party came to the studio, and with huge screens, with enormous amount of attendees through Zoom webinar, and that was really spectacular. But otherwise, I can say that the rest of the campaign was really quiet, except the fact that ruling parties try to be more on field, but in terms they are trying to visit the households, and especially in villages, in small towns, and also to not to talk with the people, but to provide them with some packages of food, bread help, or any kind of aid. So humanitarian work as a part or a way of political campaign definitely rule through Serbia regarding these elections. And when we are talking about legal aspects, I must say that during the election campaign, for the first time, rules are changed on a way that signature verification or signature collection was changed. It becomes easiest for the coalition and parties. And also for the first time, we had a situation that Central Electoral Commission start with electronic sessions, which is also something completely new in organizing elections in Serbia. Also, I would like to stress the point that due to epidemiological situation, voters had the chance to have a longer period to register to vote outside the polling station. So the percentage of voters who demanded to vote from home was 3.3% of total number of voters, which is twice as much as the previous parliamentary elections in 2016. So that was one important change. And from perspective of communication with the voters, I must say that CRTA's observation mission conclude that all aspects of pandemic, problems with the numbers and problems with or questions how the E-Day will be organized regarding the pandemic, regarding the all anti-COVID measures, Central Electoral Commission missed that point. So they stayed completely quiet during the election period, and Election Commission published rules and procedures regarding the prevention measures 4 days before E-Day. And there was no time to, from our point of view, there was no time to properly explain to the people what to expect when they come to the polling station. And that was one of the crucial things regarding the E-Day, I will say. So that was something most important regarding the elections in Serbia. And of course, there were cases of manipulation with the facts, with the numbers, official statistic regarding the COVID. But during the pre-election campaign, nobody talks about that. After the elections, thanks to the investigative journalism, we know more about the fake numbers and statistical details. But during the elections, it was not under the scope of the public. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pavel. I'll have just a brief follow-up on that. Like, you know, so how did like the whole political movement around the boycott of elections and the protests after the elections and everything get into the picture in terms of also the pandemic and everything? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, well, boycott campaign were present during the election campaign. There was present via online channels, social networks, without, of course, some specific meetings or big public events. But it's really hard to say how that affects the election day. For example, we know that 49% of voters votes actually on the election day. The lowest turnout, it was the lowest turnout in the parliamentary history in Serbia. But I must say that the really lowest turnout was in Belgrade. It was less than 40%. It was around 38.5. And if we are talking about influence of boycotts on the turnout, we can conclude that in Belgrade it makes sense, and it was the result, probably the result of the boycott campaign. After the election, we had really messy situation with the protests, with COVID-motivated protests, and part of the opposition tried also to use protests for their political points. But we have a lot of security problems during the protest fights with the police officers and everything else, which is not directly connected with the election process, but it is connected with the disinformation, definitely, because too much manipulation with important information, too much different sounds, and too much also misuse of public interest regarding the political points in campaign confused people. So after these last elections, I can say that even less people in Serbia believes that political change or social change can come through the elections. Simply, people even less than before, trust in the system. And I would say that's really bad, because our position as civil society activists, we are trying to reform the institution, not to ruin them. So the solution in this situation is not to go to the house, but to reform institution to become a part of really democratic society. Yeah.
Thank you, Pavle. Well, we are one country left. Like, you know, Croatia had elections, but unfortunately, at the moment, Sandra is still not here with us. She had a session of the parliament, actually, where she is one of the persons who proposed the law moved from the morning to the afternoon session, and we are expecting her any minute to join. But, like, you know, until she joins, we'll just continue. If she doesn't join, we'll definitely do an online interview with her and like post it also on the Point website. But just like to for everybody to know that that's the reason why she's still not with us here. So with that in mind, we'll get to our last panelist, Philip. Philip is from Metamorphosis, North Macedonia, and with this we go into this, like, you know, other topic of the which we have kind of dwelled upon a little bit so far, but like, you know, we wanna talk more about the disinformation during the elections and the pre-election campaign, and in general with connection with the pandemic. So Metamorphosis has done a rather extensive research on the COVID-related disinformation with an emphasis on elections. So could you please tell us what happened in North Macedonia in regards to that, Philip?
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here and participate at this esteemed panel. We have been part of the Point conference for years, and we miss all the, how can I put that, opportunities that arise from also physical contact, but we are happy that we have this transformed format at least, and there is so much to learn in this way too. I will share first some of the basic findings that we had through our research and experience at Metamorphosis Foundation, which combines different approaches in order to tackle the problem of disinformation, from fact-checking to general journalism reporting to basically advocacy, research, and capacity building of civil society and media. As an introduction, I will share a few slides that exemplify this this situation, but I'm trying just to, oh, I cannot share the screen. Darko, could you try to do that if you please? Because
I'll try, but continue speaking, and I'll try sharing if possible from my side.
Of course, yeah. If you can, please share it. So basically, we start from one basic premise that even before the pandemic and the infodemic, as it's usually called, the surge of disinformation related to the pandemic, and even before the campaigns that included disinformation regarding the elections in North Macedonia, we already had a very low level of public trust in the country, which has been a result of years of propaganda and years of backsliding from democracy that we had in the previous decades. Now, with the process of restoring the democratic character of the institutions that started in 2017 after the 2016 elections, we have different types of activities that has been conducted by the institutions themselves, which have gone into the direction of improvement of the situation. But still, we see that the effects of the disinformation campaigns, which were part of the previous populist regime, and are still part of different political centers who have been related to it, have a very long-lasting effect. What we can see is that, for instance, a research done within the scope of our project, Critical Thinking for Media by Citizens, or CRITINC, which is done in cooperation with Eurothink, another organization from North Macedonia, is that the population has already been very susceptible to conspiracy theories and to other forms of disinformation, which is common to most of the Balkans. And for instance, this research showed that over 60% of the surveyed citizens are susceptible to specific conspiracy theories related to the COVID epidemic. Some, not to all of them, but to at least to some conspiracy theories, a large percentage of the population has already been under that influence. If the research also showed that the pandemic increased the widespread mistrust into the institutions of liberal democracy and the concept of democracy themselves. One of the outcomes was that many people thought that or expressed opinions that only a strong hand rule can solve the pandemic, which is indicative in itself about their general outlook on how the state should be run. And even though there was this level of mistrust is high, almost half of the citizens expressed opinion that they think that the government is hiding something, while 28% expressed explicit opinion that they think that the government is fully transparent. Over 65% of the surveyed people expressed approval of the government measures, while only 22% thought that they are too strict. So we didn't have complete dominance of these disinformation campaigns that try to undermine the trust in the institutions. And then we come to the elections period. We did another study, Metamorphosis in cooperation and partnership with the Friedrich Neumann Foundation from Germany. And we examined the content of the over 483, almost 500 instances of disinformation, which have been treated through fact-checking articles or through debunking articles or counter-spin articles, which examine not only the facts, but the overall context and the spin that has been done. And this research actually indicated that the political bias has been the major factor in spreading disinformation. People spread the disinformation which they think is in line with their preconceived prejudice, biases, and so on, but especially in the sense of political bias. And in case of North Macedonia, let's say over 18% of the examined disinformation instances have been dealing with some sort of bias related to political party or overall ideology which can be related to a political party. So for instance, this is type of disinformation saying that the leftists are doing this, which is directly related to one option, or the right wing is doing that, which is directly related to another option, concrete political parties. And related to the intersection of disinformation about COVID-19 and the elections, the key types of, or the most common disinformation types were 5. These were the political manipulations related to the date of the elections, because the date of the elections was moved from April to July, but it didn't go smoothly. There were negotiations, there were speculations, there was a process that was fertile ground for various types of disinformation about the date and the overall conduct of the elections under the pandemic. Then there was incitement of distrust through disinformation, which claimed that the institutions intend to sacrifice citizens. So there was spreading of fear and panic about the elections, which didn't affect the the participation
So
of
it's
citizens
just to
so
let you
much.
know that we are letting now from our side we are playing the slide, so you just know that
Yes,
there.
thank you, Darko. I can see it. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yes, this is the level of already existing distrust, which increased during the pandemic. And could you just show the last slide, please? The one with the truth meter. Yes. So the third type of disinformation related to COVID and the elections was accusations about the politicians tailoring the health protocols to fit their needs, meaning the politicians in power. Or some politicians also released disinformation about certain groups having preferential treatment. That was not the case, or that was not, there were no, on election day or before or after, there was no credible claims about this, but this was some sort of, some politicians tried to incite voting for them by trying to show that certain groups will be preferred, and also there were speculations about changes that would come after the elections, which were not substantiated by actual evidence or were not part of the political programs of the parties. It is very important to say that the pandemic and the related disinformation activities or presence of increased amount of disinformation really increased the tension during the elections. But fortunately, it was a bubble that, I mean, a balloon that didn't burst violently. So it was, even though to many levels, the disinformation was really instrumental in creating unrest or mistrust, which are related, and raising the tensions, we would say, at the political level and also at interethnic level, and also at the level of some sort of concern about public health and individual health. Thank you. That would be my intro, and I would be happy to participate in discussions with in particular questions.
Okay, I'm back here. So basically now we are moving on to the disinformation part of the talk, and Philip has kind of given us a slide into that. My question to actually all of you, and then you can take it in turn however you want, is like, have you observed political parties or candidates on the elections that were actually using, first of all, using disinformation, but then more specifically using disinformation on the pandemic as like a pre-election slogans or messages, or have they been engaged? Because we have seen in Bosnia a couple of those examples where actually people were even like, you know, running their campaign on disinformation about pandemic and disinformation in general. So like, you know, what's your take on that? Did you see that happening, and how did it all interfere in the messaging within the campaign? I mean, I can call you out, but like whoever wants to answer start.
I can maybe begin. So there was quite a lot information that had relations, this information that had relation both with pandemic and with elections. And with politics. I mean, in this specific situation, entire protests around the freedom of religion law were kind of pre-election campaign, even before the elections were called. So one of the first were in March with the first cases of coronavirus in the region. And Montenegro was the last country in the region and one of the last in Europe that actually had confirmed case. First confirmed case was March 17th, but the government the authorities were already preparing, and we were already introducing some measures even before the first case. And then there was a lockdown, and it ended the church protests, Serbian Orthodox Church protests. So one of the disinformation narrative was basically that everything is false, that the virus doesn't exist and the pandemic is false, and that is being invented by at the time ruling DPS and their leader Milo Đukanović to stop the church from organizing meetings. Then, because it was a big issue, politically big issue, not only in terms of religious rights, but the prohibition of gatherings in the churches. And there was a lot of disinformation, like we had statements that church bells can cure COVID, or that the church rituals where, you know, using the same spoon are somehow divinely protected by for spreading virus. Then when the election day was approaching, Montenegro was starting opening borders that were previously closed for a long time. So there was a bunch of disinformation that actually borders are open in order to import voters that don't have a right to vote in Montenegro. And it was meant to increase tensions and to increase ethnic tensions, because there was targeting that border with Serbia is opening in Rožaje, or that citizens of Novi Pazar and Tutin can come to vote in Montenegro. They are, for those that don't know, they are Bosniaks, and there is, you know, explicit intention of increasing inter-ethnic tensions around that. As for the politicians, pandemic was the topic, but mainly was, you know, the criticism towards at the time government of being unable to handle it properly, and, you know, promises of everyone basically how they would do better. I remember one disinformation coming from the high official of political parties. He is now mayor of Budva. Budva also had local elections together with parliamentary, and it's one of that famous disinformations that I think we all in the region debunked, that was spread all around, that actually people are being paid to stay in hospitals and to admit that they have COVID. So he said that for the one COVID hospital in the north that actually was really full of with patients, you know, and people in very difficult condition at the time. And then throughout this all, there was, and I think that still many people believe in that the danger of the virus and of the pandemic was exaggerated in order, you know, to prevent this social mobilization, these political movements and things. And I also think that contributed significantly to this problem today, that you know, one would think that new government came and that the relief came and that people will respect the new strict measures imposed by them, because they got high legitimacy on these elections with very high voters turnout. But no, actually, it's very difficult now in Montenegro to introduce any new prohibition because people just don't believe in virus or don't believe in measures. And Montenegro situation is somewhat improved now, but according to one poll, I think from last month or two, had the lowest percentage of those who would get vaccinated. Well, good for them because there is no vaccine. But anyways, I mean, it was kind of topic. It was mainly disinformation narratives were mainly aimed to underestimating the risks and dangers, and we will be seeing consequences of that, because for such a long time people were from different sources convinced that there is no danger. I also want to say in terms of disinformation environment, we did media monitoring and we are doing disinformation monitoring all the time. So media in Montenegro are heavily polarized, and that especially becomes visible in election campaign when you see the obvious political bias of practically all outlets, and that is something that our media monitoring confirmed. But Montenegrin media mainly are not producers of disinformation in this narrow sense that this is something false that is deliberately created to deceive and to manipulate. So they would have mistakes and faulties and bias reporting all the time, but as we already know from regional researches that Zašto ne did, in case of Montenegro, birthplace of most widespread disinformation are actually tabloids from Serbia and several strong regional right-wing portals. So even around these things, this disinformation that Montenegro is opening borders, then that Croatian football clubs fans will come to create incidents, that criminals from Belgrade will come to create incidents, that terror, you know, that mainly birthplace of this disinformation were Serbian tabloids.
Thank you, Milica. Well, I have some kind of two-in-one question for all panelists, which will be some kind of general conclusion. The question is, how the pandemic affected and changed the elections in Balkans in terms of election preparation and holding of elections? And whether the pandemic was abused, and how and did it affect some kind of turnout?
Selma, I just want to give more people the chance to answer the question as I put. So let's get back to that later. Damian, what's your take on this information in Macedonia? And I know that there have been issues such as like the name issue and European Atlantic integration issues that were definitely in the forefront of the issues in Macedonia on the elections. And how did this information play into that also? If you could touch upon that.
Well, on the specific issue of the disinformation, I would say that we were much bigger target of field of disinformation during the referendum for the name change rather than for the elections. And this is when, during the referendum, which was held 2019, there were strong geopolitical forces involved into strong disinformation campaigns in North Macedonia. That in a way gave some grounds for this, but at the end of the day, everything turned out fine, and we were able with the truth to fight the disinformation. During the electoral campaign, there was, but in a lower level, because it was more or less of a just domestic issue. The referendum was more geostrategical with the involvement of the global players. What happened during the electoral campaign, it was prior of the elections that there were a lot of disinformation because of the attempt of the opposition to further delay the elections, and they were using the arguments of the health safety issues to further delay the elections due to their own political benefits. After the opposition agreed for a date of elections, all of a sudden this was no longer an issue. There were no problems from the health-related issues, and the campaign went without, let's say, the weight of some kind of a doubt from the main political players, at least, regarding the health and safety issues. There were some smaller groups close maybe to the extreme nationalistic forces, again, a bit more on the fringes of the political landscape, that were trying to use the pandemic to discourage people to go out and vote. But again, going back, once there was an agreed date to hold the elections, accepted by all major political forces, especially by the opposition, all of a sudden this question disappeared. Nobody was all of a sudden concerned about this. And the reality showed this is the case, because not only North Macedonia, but everywhere else in the world, we are witnessing the situation where after elections, we are not seeing spiked numbers of people being infected 14 days and within 14 days after the elections of new COVID cases, which would be out of the ordinary. So this is a very clear example that elections can be organized safely in these pandemic conditions, and that people, again, there has to be protocols, there has to be policies, there has to be measures, there has to be strong campaigns for building the confidence of the citizens to go out and vote. But if all this is in place, not only us, many other countries have shown that elections are okay to be organized in these conditions. The disinformation, not only on this topic, on this subject, but all of we have a motto even here to say that the best mechanism to fight disinformation is the truth. There is no tool, there is no digital tool, there is no software. I sincerely endorse fact checking, but this is reactive, it's not preemptive. So the truth, presenting the truth everywhere and through all platforms and channels is the best way to fight disinformation on everything. So the same goes for this subject as well.
And Pavel, finally, how did this information play into the Serbian elections and in general? Like not only the pandemic one, but the general disinformation.
Yeah. Well, when we are talking about disinformation, it's interesting to say that in case in Serbia, we had two important disinformation players. One was actually the member of the crisis headquarters during the pandemic. Probably the region know for the professor, Dr. Nestorovic. He tried very often to actually confuse people, because he sent the messages that there is no pandemic, or all measure which were obliged is actually the fake or not necessary. So the problem is that he actually spoke as a person, as a prominent person, as officially member of the crisis headquarters. And in the same time, or 20 or 15 minutes after that, the rest of the crew send completely different messages, and that confused people at all, and it's still confusing even after the elections. And the second thing is that we on elections, we had the political party who tried to present the pandemic as a theory of change, and that everything is fake, that there is no pandemic, and some forces are united against the humanity, and that's the reason of pandemic, and that's the party Dosta je Bilo, and they try to attract people and voters who don't believe in a pandemic. They didn't pass the threshold, but they're still active in spreading fake news and disinformation, of course, and they continue ruin the trust into the system. They tried also to ruin the whole election system, because they produce thousands and thousands of fake complaints in order to collapse the whole administrative system of Central Electoral Commission. They didn't succeed, of course, but it was unfortunately interesting to follow. Yeah.
Thank you, Pavle. I have for all of you one question, actually two questions from the audience. If there anything which you would monitor differently now, or even something new specific to this situation for those who have no experience of elections during a pandemic. And of course, one questions from audience regarding vaccines. What are the attitudes of the ruling party in your countries?
We can maybe make this a final round. So we'll start with Philip and then move it as a final round. So include any your closing remarks also with this also.
All right. I mean, it's very important in regard to monitoring of the elections. It's very important to establish a network of monitoring also at local level with people working directly across the country. Usually, most of the media, NGOs, and other constructive actors are located in the capitals. And there is this disproportion in, how can I put that? In the region in regard to the visibility of activities in the big cities and the rural areas and across that board. I would also like to share something about the general situation. Metamorphosis has, as a result of our studies, has proposed that in the past, we were part of NGO coalitions that in a way incited political parties before the elections to sign declarations for fair, free and democratic elections. Some of the parties did not respect these declarations, but they would take a commitment which would be used for advocacy and for activities subsequently by the civil sector, by the media. And it would be very good as our idea to engage the parties in the fight against disinformation, both related to the elections, but also in general, because it is important for the parties to acknowledge the problem of disinformation as such, and to take more active role. We agree with Mr. Manchevsky, who said that the transparency of the institutions is and openness is the basic prerequisite, but and should be advanced as much as possible. But also, the situation with disinformation is so dire that it requires active measures about the disinformation. And most of the actors in our society have not taken such activities, except for the civil sector and to a very small degree the media and some political actors. So the academia is completely absent or almost completely absent, and other political actors such as the parties need to take more active role in this, starting from basically identifying disinformation which affect the public interest, even when they come from their own sources, and creating a culture in which the debunking is not only part of issuing denials of opponents' claims, but to start working on joint effort to counter the disinformation about the pandemic, and to incite their followers to join the fight as citizens, because this whole situation, in the situation of the pandemic, is very damaging. The undermining of trust against the health institutions has started with the anti-vaxxer movement even in the past. Many populist politicians, not officially political parties, have at one point or another tried to, in a way, exploit the anti-vaccine sentiments, but part of their target audiences, so people who are susceptible to different types of propaganda, which is related to anti-vaccine. And this has been upgraded during the pandemic. So another aspect is that many political parties support unprofessional media, and this has also been a major factor in the fight against the infodemic, because even though some of the media were not openly advocating certain, how can I say, not certain positions like that are open conspiracy theories, there has been a lot of media activity that has been part of that whole spectrum and inciting the mistrust of the citizens. Basically, I think this could be my also closing remark, that during a pandemic, and especially in regard to these fundamental democratic processes like the elections, but many others, it's really important to acknowledge the problem of disinformation as a danger to democracy and to society and to health, and to tackle it across the society. Or if some of the political actors have not been willing to take part in this process, similar like to hate speech and other harmful activities done through the media and social networks, they have to be also called out, and that should be also part of the discussion at a more widespread level.
Selma, you're muted. Selma, unmute yourself.
Thank you, Philip. Pavle, please speak up.
Yeah, thank you. Well, there were questions regarding the vaccines and ruling parties. Well, I must say that on example of vaccines, we can see in Serbia how there is no border anymore between state and political party. So ruling party grab all success, all applause for vaccines, for any kind of all types of results of the health system, actually. So even in campaign, we had TV shows and promo materials with doctors, people in white uniforms, wearing the messages to support ruling parties. And all this situation with pandemic shows that in Serbia, there is no border, really no border between public interest and state and parties, political parties. And we will see in upcoming period how citizens will react, because of course it's not normal in the society to don't know what is the state and public interests, and there is no monopoly of one political party. And there will also question what we as observers can do something different in observation. Well, one of our conclusions is that we need to improve further the process of educating and how to inform citizens or voters about their rights, and also to improve our online tool for education of observers. For the first time, we successfully manage it. We online to educate all our observers for polling stations and also long-term observers. It was great experience, but with a lot of stress. So for next elections, we will improve it additionally. And thank you, and apologize from my side because another conference is just starting. So from my side, once again, thank you for inviting me, and it was a great pleasure to speak with all of you.
Thank you, Pavle. Pavle basically answered another question from audience. Do you have any advice for the upcoming election in the region? Question from Albania. So Milica, Damian, please note that. So Milica?
I would like to say something that Pavle didn't mention, and I think it's important, and I think it's important for the concept of point, because I'm hoping that this year's point, the way it's structured, actually can maybe offer some ideas on this. So in terms of traditional techniques of monitoring, yeah, it's more difficult, it's complicated. You have to impose also the new organizational rules to meet the anti-pandemic measures. You need more people, everything is more complicated, you need to use online tools. But this is all doable. We know what we are doing. But what we've seen in these elections, I mean, in the time of, or in the era of disinformation and in the time of pandemics, we all saw that campaigns, political campaigns are significantly shifting online. And on social media, and that the disinformation campaigns are going the same direction. So I'm talking to people, to colleagues about something more useful that or more effective that would be monitoring of online media in elections, and especially of social media. So some organizations are doing it. There are some good examples, but still this is quite experimental, because there is no yet some comprehensive methodology that will allow us to collect all the information to get the full picture, or to assess how much is that influencing generally the public opinion. And moreover, it's even more difficult. So you can monitor, you can have some assessment and some conclusions, but what is important for election observers is how do you react, how do you stop that, how do you change that. The problem with this is there is no address for that. So this area in not just in our region, but worldwide remains underregulated. It's a space where everyone is hesitant to go because of the protection of the freedom of speech, of freedom of internet. So there is no authority, there is no regulation. Also, our countries in this region are not part of this big codes of conduct with the tech giants, so we hardly can influence or provoke any official reaction from the big social networks. From, I don't know, even if you discover something, I'm doubting that you can get the prompt reaction of, you know, Facebook or Twitter or whatever in stopping that. So I know that you will also have panels on elections in developed democracies, and they are facing similar problems. And for me, it will be useful to listen to that and hopefully to hear from them how the election observation is more effective when it comes to observation of what's going on in online space. Because as we see it, we will stay in this online mode for quite a while, and it will definitely also change our habits. So maybe even if one day we stop this pandemic, the elections will never go back to the same old practices of big rallies, you know, in halls and streets. So I think that focus of election monitoring communities should be on development of tools and methodologies to have a better oversight of what's going on online, but also in looking for lines and paths on how to intervene and how to actually where to go and complain to stop this identifying malign behaviors.
You are muted again, Selma, so I'll just call out Damian again.
Yeah, I guess she was saying that. I cannot read lips, but I guess that was it. I like to keep things simple and simpler, maybe. So in regards of how to communicate with people to fight disinformation regarding the health situation, but still for them to motivate them to participate in democracy, it's very simple message saying that, yes, everybody wants to go back to work, they want to go to shopping, they want to go to restaurants and bars. On the same level, it is as much as safe to go out and vote. So this is the way how we should fight disinformation when fighting people who are discouraging people to go out and vote. So there is, if we want to keep any kind of sense of normality, as the way we are organizing, how to go to work, how to go to school, how to go to this and that, we can organize elections. And this is the level of messaging we need to just communicate with people, just to encourage them to participate in democracy. And I think so far we haven't seen any example in the world that people did not go out and vote in relevant, let's say, numbers. In regards to the how do we fight disinformation in social media, I'm going to relate a bit to what Ms. Kovacevic said. Look at the US elections. I mean, the beacon of democracy in the world, and look at what happened. Did the social networks react? No, they did, too late, after it was all finished. They will never do that, no matter who you are, because they're only a tool. They're only a tool, and any tool in the hand of a wrong person is dangerous. If you give someone a book, they can kill you with it by hitting you on the head. So it's just a tool. You cannot expect anyone to protect you for that. It's really very basic good people against bad people. That's it, no matter how ridiculous it sounds. So we must, as citizens, be engaged enough to differentiate, no matter where they're coming from which political parties. They're good and bad people in all parties. Just to differentiate at this level, that will be enough. And I think we do have the power as societies, as people, as individuals, to present at least this information, which will be valid enough or good enough for people to decide. And something that I fully agree with also what Ms. Kovacevic said, is that this pandemic, even when we go back to some kind of normality, fundamentally changed the way we're going to conduct politics and especially electoral campaigns. Not only because we've seen different, but it's also, you know, societies have changed, people have changed. If it was mandatory to go canvassing, I was very much organizing these door-to-door activities for 2 decades here. Now I don't think that they're working as much as they did, especially in urban areas. Yes, in rural, maybe this is still the case, but also from financial point of view, I mean, not only that is from health-wise safer not to have big rallies, but it's significantly cheaper. Political parties used to spend lots of money on these big rallies just to show muscles. And it's nothing more just to show muscles. In these big rallies, only hardcore party supporters were coming and nobody else. You don't gain any voters with big rallies. You're only doing it to show off, nothing else. And finally, and this was an internal debate within even my political party when I was even ahead of electoral campaigns, whether do we do them or not? And we never had the courage to decide not to do them. There were always people from within who would say, no, this is very important. We need to show how strong we are, blah, blah, blah. These elections show that it really does not matter. And this is a very good lesson to be learned by every political stakeholder, even the ones, and I've seen them in the countries in the region who did do big rallies. I'm very glad to send them the message that they don't have to do it because they don't reflect in any number of votes. And second, they save money. It's cheaper. So very important for whoever organizes campaigns. This is the second part. So in all the negative aspects coming out of the pandemic, and there is a lot of, I think, also positive things that we've learned to repeat again, to use again, even when life hopefully goes back to normal as soon as possible. Regarding the question, I sent my answer in the chat. I'm just going to repeat it again. It's very simple. During the electoral campaign, monitor big rallies and if there is social distancing and wearing of masks, as in everyday life. During the electoral day, distance, mask, hand disinfection. That's it. But it's very important to engage the local community, and this is what I fully agree with Philip, that you need to engage local stakeholders, local NGOs, as many of them as possible, to have overall view on the situation.
Thank you, Damian. Thank you, all panelists, dear friends, for your time, for your expertise. Also, I would like to thank all our audience. Thank you so much for watching us. And for the final word, of course, I will ask our Darko Brkan.
Yeah, I'll be just brief. So thank you all for being here. First of all, I need to thank all of our partners that have been out there for years, like, you know, on the first place, our co-organizers, Action C Network and all its members, all of our regional who have been here throughout the years and who have been there for the Point Conference, and we definitely hope to see you again. I would like to thank IFET for being like kind of a co-sponsor of this particular panel and event, and of course, like our partners from the beginning of Point, that's National Endowment for Democracy and Balkan Trust for Democracy, for their support. And basically, thank you all the panelists. This has been definitely a good choice for the first panel of Point this year, and I think it was extremely interesting, and more definitely, for sure, the best online panel I have ever moderated, and definitely in the top Point panels that we ever had. So thank you, and keep watching us on the Point Conference. There's plenty more to come. Thank you. Bye bye.